Today's daf is Lamed Gimel, and we're up to Lema Kasavri Rabbanon. So let's keep in mind that the Rabbanon are of the opinion, as also reflected in our Mishnah, Stam Mishnah, that Kriyat Shema can be recited in any language. And the Chiddush of Kriyat Shema is based on the Pasuk Shema, and the Rabbanon understood Shema b'chol loshon shata shomeh. So the Gemara says, Lema kasavri Rabbanon, and this is the fourth line down from the top of the Amud here. Kol haTorah kula b'lashon kodesh nemra, meaning all the kriyas in the Torah, whenever we read the Torah, and some of the kriyas are even doraisa, we could read them only in lashon kodesh, not in any other language. These are kedaita b'chol lashon. If we're going to assume that the general rule universally is that Kriyas Parshiyos Shebetorah can be achieved through any language, then Shema Dekos Rachman Olamali, why did the Torah have to go out of its way with the extra josh of Shema to teach me and include Kriyat Shema in the general rule that applies to all Kriyas of all Parshiyos Shebetorah? And the Gemara rejects this Itzrich. It's true that all the Parshiyos of the Torah can be read in any language. However, we still need a pasuk Shema in Kriyat Shema. I would have thought Kriyat Shema is the exception to the Mishum T'chsiv Hayu. And as we saw yesterday on Daf Lamed Beis Amid Beis, Rebbe interprets the word Vahayu as Bavayasan Yu, which means that you have to read it in its original in Lashon Kodesh. So that based on Vahayu, we would have come to the mistaken conclusion, if not for the drush of Shema, that Kriyat Shema has to be read in Lashon Kodesh. So Shema teaches me, don't interpret Vahayu that way. And we have another drasha, alternatively, for the word Vahayu, according to the Rabbanon, that we should not read Lemafreya, but rather we should read in order, in sequence of the Parshios. The Gemara now goes on to discuss tefillah, which can be recited in any language. And the Gemara says that's based on a svara. Tefillah rachmehi, or as the Gemara says in Brachos rachmeninu. It's bakoshes rachm, kol hechi deboy mitzale. In any way that he wants to daven and pray to Hashem, he has that expanded license, and therefore it's a davar pashut, al pi svara, that he could be mispal in any language. But the Gemara objects to this. The Gemara says, "Utfila b'chol lashon v'amar Rabbi Yehuda leolam al yishal adam tzroch b'lashon aramis." A person should not pray in Aramaic, and the reason for that is, as we'll soon see, is because the Malachi Hashois will not be able to help him in his prayers because they don't understand Aramaic. The Omer Rabbi Yochanan kol hashol tzroch b'lashon arami ein malachi hashois niskakim lo. The malachim cannot help him and sort of push up his tfilos in front of the Ribono Shel Olam because lefi she'ein malachi hashois makir b'lashon arami. And therefore, I would come to the conclusion, based on this statement of Rabbi Yochanan, that a person ought to be praying in Lashon Kodesh, the language that the malachi hashois recognize. And how then could the Mishnah say that you could be mispal b'chol lashon? Now, even though it's clear that despite the absence of angelic support in the case of chol lashon, nevertheless, b'di'evet would certainly be yotzias tefillah. But the Gemara is based on the fact that the Mishnah seems to indicate that there's no difference whatsoever between Lashon Kodesh and Kol Lashon. And Lashon Acheres would be fine even lechatchila. The Gemara is objecting to that because if you daven in Lashon Acheres like Arami, you're going to be missing the angelic support. Lo kasha b'yochid habitzibur. When Rabbi Yehuda said that you should avoid davening in Lashon Arami, he was referring to a Yachid. The tefillah of a Yachid, of an individual, is not as powerful, and therefore it really needs that angelic support. And therefore you should avoid praying in a language that the Malachim don't recognize. But B'tzibur, there's a certain power with regard to the Tzibur. Like, for example, the Gemara says in Brachos, Ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu Moes B'tfilas HaRabim, and that's derived from a pasuk in Eov, Heim Kel Kabir V'lo Yim'as. And therefore, the Tzibur doesn't need any angelic aid. They can do it on their own. They don't need a malitzim. Malitzim means those who speak in favor and advocate to the Ribono Shalom on high to accept the tefillos, because there's such an inherent power in the tefillas hatzibur. And therefore the Mishnah, when it's talking about reciting tefillah, even lechatchila in any language, it's referring to the tzibur hamispal. Now, I just want to point out here that there are two concepts of tefillah vis-a-vis tzibur. One is the chazaras hashatz, in which the shliach tzibur is the only actual mispalel who's enunciating the words on behalf of the entire tzibur. And then there's every individual davening for himself together with another 9 people in the presence of a tzibur. I believe that this Gemara here in tzibur is not referring to chazaras hashatz, but rather to a tzibur that's mispalim together. And that's why it says in Shulchan Aruch that if you can't get to daven, you should try to at least be mechamin and synchronize your davening with the tzibur, so that there's a special din of having 10 people davening together. And now we're going to enter into a whole discussion in the Gemara about whether, in fact, Malachi Ashares do not, as the Gemara assumes until now, based on the statement of Rabbi Yochanan, did not understand the Aramaic language. The Ein Malachi Ashares Makim Lashon Arami v'Hasanyo Yochanan HaKohen Gadol. When he did the avodah on Yom Kippurim, Shoma Baskol, he heard a Baskol coming from the Malachim up in Shomayim. The base Kodesh Kadoshim, and this Baskol came out of the Kodesh Kadoshim, Shu Omer, and the Baskol spoke in perfect Aramaic, Notzchu Talia, the Ozu Lagocha, Ravad Antioch. And now we're referring to the battles of the Chashmonoim during the middle period of Bayis Sheni against the Yevonim. And the Baskol says that the Pirchei Kahuna, the young Kohanim, who went out to battle against the Yevonim in the city of Antioch, and they succeeded. That's called Notzchu. Notzchu means they were able to defeat the Yevonim in the city of Antioch, which is named after the emperor of the Greeks. Furthermore, another proof that the Baskol came from Shomayim and spoke Aramaic, Maisa b'Shimon HaTzadik sheshoma Baskol b'beis Kodesh Kadoshim shu Omer, the Baskol declared in perfect Aramaic, b'telas avidita the Omar Snoah, the enemies, the Isaiah al Hechola, the program and the plots of the enemies of the Jewish people were betelos. They were revoked. So they had the Anshi Chayil, and the Jewish soldiers thought that the enemies would come and battle against Yerushalayim and enter into the Beis Hamikdash. And the Baskol came out to say betelas. Betelas means all the avidita, all the tochniot, all the programs of the enemies were batel. Halavai, that should happen in our time. The Nerag Gaskalgos, who is the king of Yavan, and he was murdered. Ubatlu gzeirosov, and as a result, his gzeira to put up a tselem in his dmus inside the heichal was batel. And on Motzai Yom Kippur, Kosvu Osasha, they wrote down a record of that hour in which the Baskel went out. Vikivnu B'lashon Arami Haya Omer. And at that time, the Chashmonaim defeated the Yavanim, and the king of Yavan was killed. And the Brisa says that the Malach who was in charge, a Mamuna of the Baskel, he spoke in perfect Aramaic. So you see the Malachim understand Aramaic. And the Gemara gives a number of answers to this question. First answer by Sema, Baskel shiny dilishmui avidi. That Malach who was in charge of projecting the Baskel, he's different than all the other Malachim. The Malachim in general don't understand Aramaic, but his job is to send out the Baskel in many different, multiple languages, sometimes in that language, sometimes a different language, so that the people on the face of the globe will understand the message. And he knew all 70 languages, including Aramaic. But the other rank and file Malachim who were not in charge of Baskel, they don't understand Aramaic. Ibais have another answer, is Gavriel Hava. The Gemara tells us later on in Daf Lamed Vav, Mar Ba Gavriel V'Limdo Shivim Lashon. When Yosef appeared in front of Paro, he had to know the languages, and they tested him for his chachma, and Gavriel came the night before and taught him all 70 languages. So when the Malach sent out a Baskel, it was none other than Gavriel who knew 70 languages. The Mishnah tells us that Birkas Hamazon ne'ameres b'chol lashon b'dichsiv v'achalto v'savato v'irachtos Hashem Elokecha. You should bless Hashem. Torah doesn't tell you that you need a certain language. You can bless Hashem b'chol lashon shatam mevarech. Whatever language you understand, you should bless Hashem in the Birkas Hamazon. There's a question here about the girsa, whether it says minolan or not. Tosfos has a girsa minolan. Rashi doesn't have minolan, and he says because there was never even a havamina that you would need a pasuk to teach us that Birkas Hamazon is nemeres b'chol lashon. There was never a real serious havamina that Birkas Hamazon requires exclusively lashon kodesh. Therefore, the Gemara drops the minolan. The Mishnah says, "Mashbiim shvuas ha'edus b'chol lashon d'ksiv v'nefesh ki sechta v'shama kol ola." Notice that the word v'shama is in feminine because we're talking about a nefesh, and we're talking about a nefesh that took a shvua that the litigant, what's it called in English? The tovea. What's the opposite of defendant? There's an English word for tovea. What's it called? Not claimant. All right, slips my mind, sorry. Anyway, the one who's making the claim imposes a shvua on this person, knowing that that person has edus on his behalf. And after the person accepted the shvua and he refused to come and testify on behalf of the tovea, now he admits his crime and he really does have edus. He has to bring a korban olah v'yoreh. And from the fact that it doesn't say in the pasuk v'shbi'uha b'shvuas ha'olah, which would imply lashon kodesh, but rather v'shama'ah, and as we saw in Kriyat Shema, v'shama'ah indicates any language, is b'chol lashon she'shomas. And again, the word he in feminine is referring to the nefesh. So we definitely have a diuk in the pasuk from which we derive the conclusion that Shvuas HaEdus could be in any language. What about Shvuas HaPikadon? Let's say Ruvain claims that that Shimon borrowed 100, Shimon admits 50 and denies 50, has to take a Shvuas HaPikadon, and we could be mashpiyim in any language that Shimon understands. Asya, we have a Gzeres Shava that equates Shvuas HaPikadon with Shvuas HaEdus. Techta. In Shvuas HaPikadon, it says Nefesh ki sechta, umal amal b'Hashem. V'kichesh ba'miso b'Pikadon, etc., etc. And in Shvuas HaEdus, it says V'nefesh ki sechta, v'shama kol ola. Again, the word sechta. So we have sechta in Shvuas HaPikadon, we have sechta in Shvuas HaEdus. Equating the two, we've already derived from a drasha that Shvuas HaEdus is nemeres b'chol lashon, and the same halacha applies to Shvuas HaPikadon. However, the Mishnah says in Kachas, Elu nemar b'lashon HaKodesh, mikra bikurim v'chalitza v'chulei. And the end of the Mishnah, it says mikra bikurim keitzad. How do we know that bikurim has to be read, the mikra bikurim dafka in lashon HaKodesh? Because the pasuk says, V'yanisa v'yamarta l'fnei Hashem Elokecha. And we're going to make an equation here between Mikra Bikurim, where we find the word Aniyah, and the brachos and klolos of the Leviim, Lahalan Omer, V'anu HaLevim, again, the word Aniyah. V'Omer Al Kol Ish Yisrael. Ma Aniyah Amura Lahalan V'Lashon Kodesh, just like in the case of the Leviim, they spoke Lashon Kodesh, Afkan, so too here, in the case of Mikra Bikurim, it's got to be V'yanisa v'yamarta l'fnei Hashem Elokecha b'Lashon Kodesh. So Gemara raises the following question now. Uleviim gufayu minol. And you're premising that the Leviim themselves, when they gave their brachos and klolos, it was in Lashon Kodesh. How do we know that? And that we're going to learn from Moshe Rabbeinu. Why? Because Asya, we have a Gzeres Shava Kol Moshe. And now we're going back to the Aseres HaDibros. And we're going to see that the Aseres HaDibros were given in Lashon Kodesh. And Ksiv Hachim Brachos HaKlos, it says Kol Ram. Uksiv Hasam in Aseres HaDibros says Moshe Yadav V'Kil Bekol. So we have Kol for Gzeres Shava. Malahalan and Aseres HaDibros that were given to Moshe b'Lashon HaKodesh. Afkan here too, the brachos and klolos that were pronounced by the Leviim b'Lashon HaKodesh. And he points out here in the note, in the name of Tosfos, that came in Sheish Lilmod Aniyah v'Kol Eitzel Leviim, Aniyah v'Kol Eitzel Aseres HaDibros. Tosfos points out that in Shvuas HaEdus it also says Kol. So therefore, we should derive that the Leviim spoke Lashon Kodesh in the brachos and klolos from the fact that Shvuas HaEdus, Shvuas HaEdus, is b'chol Lashon. So we should come to the opposite conclusion, that the brachos and the klolos of Leviim were said in any language because of the word kol, and the word kol appears in Shvuas HaEdus. And Tosfos answers that when we have Aniyah v'Kol, we derive from Aniyah v'Kol. So in Aseres HaDibros we have both Aniyah and Kol, and in the Leviim we have Aniyah v'Kol. In Moshe Rabbeinu Yedaber V'Elokim Yanenu v'Kol, so we have both Aniyah and Kol. And in the Leviim, we have the Onu HaLeviim, etc. Kol Ram. So we have both Aniyah and Kol, and therefore that solidifies our Gzeres Shava, equating the Leviim with Moshe. Now the Mishnah records a machlokus between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbanan as to what's the source for the fact that chalitza, back and forth, the recitations of the Yavam and the Choletzes have to be b'Lashon Kodesh. The Rabbanan derived from Gzeres Shava from brachos and klolos. Rabbi Yehuda has it from the word kacha. Chalitza keitzad, etc., etc. Rabbanan. The Gemara asks, well, why don't the Rabbanan derive from kacha exactly where Rabbi Yehuda derives, that the Amiras HaChalitza, the Nusach HaChalitza has to be b'Lashon Kodesh? What did they do with kacha? Hi kocha mayavdile. What did the Rabbanan do that they needed the word kocha and they couldn't use it to derive lashon kodesh? Kocha always indicates that it's got to be done in this way, and that's absolutely critical and indispensable. For example, chalitza requires a na'al worn by the yavam, or chalitza requires yerika befana. And since it says kacha yeyasa leish asher lo yivnes beis achiv, kacha is connected to yeyasa, and it only refers to the maisim, the actions of the chalitza sanal, the yerika befana. Those are absolutely critical. But as far as Amir and Dibur are concerned, there we don't have the word kach. Rabbi Yehuda, he does derive from the word kach that kriyas hayavama must be b'lashon kodesh. How does he know that the other maisim, like halitzas hanal, rikikas, rokek, is ma'akev? And the Gemara says that Rabbi Yehuda darshans an extra chaf. Micho kacha could have said ko yeyaseh, and instead of saying ko yeyaseh is kacha yeyaseh. So the extra chaf is a ribui to include not only the maisim that have to be kacha, but even the kriya itself has to be b'lashon kodesh. So the Rabbanon and the Gemara answers ko kacha lo mashma. They don't have a drasha from the extra chaf.